Hello, and welcome to Brada Tales. Tonight, we're bringing you a selection of eerie stories paired with the soothing sound of rain to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Before diving into the atmosphere of suspense, leave a comment below letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is. If these stories send chills down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get comfortable, let the fear gradually envelop you, and tell us what kind of stories you'd like to hear next time. Settle in, we're about to begin. The Ghost from the Library. I've always loved working in the Harvard Library. The grand, old building, with its flickering lights, exuded a calm that soothed me after long lectures. It was my place, a kind of refuge from the world, from people. The silence, the smell of old paper, and the echo of my footsteps on the marble floors were comforting. It was late in the evening, and most students had left hours ago. The library felt like a different world when it was empty, as though it belonged to another time. A place frozen in history, and I was just a visitor among its many secrets. I was accustomed to the silence, the stillness. But tonight, something felt off. I brushed off the feeling at first, chalking it up to exhaustion. It had been a long week, and the routine of sorting through books and helping students had started to wear on me. But as I moved down the aisles, the quiet seemed heavier than usual. Almost like the air itself was thick with something I couldn't name. My footsteps echoed a little too loud. The flickering lights above seemed to hum a little too loudly. I shook my head, trying to focus on my work. But the unease was there, lurking just beneath the surface, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I continued my work, trying to ignore the strange feeling that had settled in the air. The silence around me seemed too complete, too perfect, like something was waiting to break it. Then, I heard it. A faint rustling sound, almost like the turning of pages. I froze, my hand still on the stack of books I was organizing. The noise was subtle, just on the edge of hearing, but it was there. It was coming from the far corner of the library. I glanced around. The library was completely empty. There were no students, no other staff members. Only me and the shelves of old books stretching endlessly into the darkness. I told myself it was just the wind. Maybe a draft was making the pages of a forgotten book flutter. The library was full of old, brittle books that could easily be disturbed by the smallest movement of air. But as I stood there, the rustling grew louder. It wasn't the wind. It was the distinct sound of pages flipping, one after another, at a steady pace. I swallowed and took a slow step forward toward the sound. Maybe someone had left a book open and the pages were moving on their own. Or maybe the old ventilation system had kicked in, disturbing a stack of loose papers. I reached the corner, my heart starting to race for no reason I could explain. There was no one there. The shelves were empty, the aisles dark. But the rustling continued. It was coming from one of the bookshelves, right in front of me. I stepped closer, holding my breath. It was coming from a single book. The pages were turning by themselves, slowly, methodically, as though someone invisible were reading it. I took another step back, my mind struggling to find a logical explanation. Maybe the lights were playing tricks on my eyes, or maybe I was just tired. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the unease in my chest refused to go away. Something wasn't right. I stood frozen, watching the book's pages flutter in the air as if moved by an invisible hand. But then, something else caught my eye, something I couldn't explain. At the far end of the aisle, just beyond the row of books, a figure began to take shape. It was faint at first, like a wisp of smoke in the dim light. The figure was blurry, indistinct, its edges barely visible. But as it solidified, I saw it, a person, or what looked like one, seated at a table, reading a book. The figure didn't move, its posture stiff and unnatural, as if frozen in time. It was a man, or at least something that resembled a man, with dark hair and a long coat, his face obscured by shadows. He sat completely still, his eyes seemingly focused on the pages in front of him. But there was something wrong. I could see it now. The pages he was turning were stained with something dark. At first, I thought it was ink, but as I stepped closer, I saw the truth. It was blood. The blood was smeared across the pages, soaking into the edges, staining the paper in slow, deliberate patterns. It wasn't just a little blood, either. It spread across the pages like a dark web, as if the book itself were bleeding. I blinked, my heart racing. The library around me felt impossibly still, as though the world had stopped moving. The figure didn't notice me. It just kept turning the pages, as if nothing in the world could interrupt it. I took a hesitant step forward, my breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed for me to run, to get away from whatever this was, but my feet wouldn't move. I had to see it, had to know what was going on. I reached out a hand, but just as my fingers were about to touch the edge of the table, the figure disappeared. In the blink of an eye, it was gone. The book was still there, open, with blood-stained pages fluttering in the air as though the figure had never been there at all. I stood in stunned silence, my pulse pounding in my ears. There were no footsteps, no signs of movement. Just the eerie, unnatural stillness of the library. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? I rubbed my eyes, willing myself to focus, but the bloodstains on the pages were still there. They were real. I stepped closer to the table, my heart hammering. But the figure was gone, leaving only the faint scent of something metallic in the air. The silence was deafening. I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. But as I turned to leave, the rustling sound returned, louder now, more insistent, echoing through the empty aisles like the whispered call of something waiting in the dark. I couldn't stay still. My mind was racing, my thoughts tangled in a haze of confusion and disbelief. I had seen it. I knew what I had seen. The figure, the blood-stained pages, it all felt so real. But there was no sign of it now. No trace of the strange, shadowy figure. I tried to steady my breathing, to calm the chaos in my head. This wasn't right. I couldn't let fear control me, not here, not now. I had to figure this out. I forced myself to walk over to the table where the figure had been, my hands trembling as I reached for the book. It was still open, its pages flicking slightly in the stale air, but there was no blood anymore. The pages were crisp and untouched, the paper yellowed with age, as though nothing had happened at all. I flipped through the pages, looking for any sign of what I had seen. But there was nothing. No blood. No trace of anything unusual. The book was just another old, forgotten volume, its pages worn with time. I pulled the book off the table and walked to the nearest bookshelf, scanning the rows of ancient texts. I tried to focus, to calm myself. I needed answers. But all I found were the same old editions, books that had been here for decades, perhaps longer. No traces of anything out of the ordinary. Had I imagined it all? Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? I stood there for a moment, staring at the shelves. My eyes darted from book to book, each one old and yellowing, but nothing out of place. Nothing that could explain what had just happened. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to make sense of it. I had been working too hard lately, maybe that was it. Long hours, the stress of school. It had to be exhaustion. But deep down, I knew something was off. Something wasn't right. I had seen that figure. I had seen the blood. And now, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. I had to stop imagining things. I had to focus on my work. I was here to organize books, not to get caught up in some supernatural fantasy. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my chest. The unease had returned, stronger than ever. And as I turned to leave the aisle, I heard it again, the faint rustling of pages turning in the silence. The air felt heavier now, colder. The once comforting silence had become stifling, oppressive. The dim light from the lamps cast long, twisted shadows across the library, stretching out like fingers reaching for me. Each step I took seemed to echo louder than the last. The quiet wasn't calming anymore, it felt like it was closing in on me. My heart raced as I glanced over my shoulder, convinced someone, or something, was there. Every time I looked, there was nothing. But the sensation remained, a constant presence lurking just beyond my vision. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I started to walk faster, my footsteps quickening as the sense of unease gnawed at my insides. The rustling sound had stopped for now, but I could still feel the weight of it, like something was waiting for me. I turned down one of the aisles, heading toward the main door. I knew I had to leave. The library, once a refuge, now felt like a prison. The shadows seemed to move, the flickering lights casting an eerie glow that made the walls appear to shift. I needed to get out of here, needed to escape whatever was lurking in the dark corners of this place. But as I reached the door, my hand gripped the handle and stopped. The door was locked. I tried again, pulling at the handle harder this time, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rose in my chest. No, this couldn't be happening. The library wasn't supposed to be locked. I'd worked here long enough to know that it was always open at night for late-night study sessions. I turned and ran to another exit, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The library was too big, too quiet now. Every corner I turned only led to more aisles, more shelves. The anxiety was suffocating. My mind raced, trying to explain it all. Was I losing my mind? Had I missed something? Maybe there was a schedule change I hadn't heard about? Or maybe I had somehow become disoriented, lost in the maze of books. I glanced at the exit signs, only to realize they were all pointing in different directions. None of them were familiar. I had worked here for months. How could I be this lost? A soft, almost imperceptible rustling filled the air again, and I froze. My eyes darted around, searching for the source. And that's when I saw it, through the rows of bookshelves, at the far end of the library. The same shadowy figure was standing there, reading. But this time, there was no mistaking it. This was real. The blood-stained pages glowed faintly in the dim light, the dark stains pooling at the corners like a terrible omen. The figure didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me at all. It was like I wasn't even there. I turned and bolted down the aisles, panic now fully setting in. I had to get out. The walls seemed to close in on me, the library stretching endlessly, a never-ending maze. I couldn't escape. The fear was rising, thick and heavy, a choking presence in the air. It was as if the library itself was alive, holding me prisoner, keeping me inside. My hands were shaking as I tried the door once more. Nothing. I couldn't leave. The more I struggled, the tighter the library's grip seemed to become. And in the silence, I heard it again, another rustle, closer now, like the turning of pages. The figure was moving toward me, slowly, deliberately, leaving the blood behind it. And I couldn't stop myself from turning to face it. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me. The library felt colder now, more sinister, as if the walls themselves were holding some long-forgotten secret. I couldn't shake the memory of the figure, the blood-stained pages, the shadowy figure reading in the dark. My mind kept returning to it, replaying every detail, trying to make sense of it. I knew I couldn't stay in that place any longer, but I had to understand. I had to know why the library had become this thing. Something was drawing me in, something I couldn't ignore. The next day, I went to the library's archives. If there was any history that might explain what was happening, it would be here. I had never paid much attention to the library's past before, but now I felt desperate to uncover whatever I could. The air in the archives was thick with dust, the shelves lined with old files, some dating back centuries. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my footsteps as I moved along the rows. I pulled out the first file I could find on the library's history, an old, leather-bound book that smelled faintly of mildew and age. The pages were yellowed, brittle, but as I flipped through them, I found what I was looking for, records of students who had died under strange circumstances. The first death was from decades ago, a young woman named Emily Holloway, a graduate student who had been found dead in the library, her body discovered in one of the reading rooms. The official cause of death was never determined. The police report was vague, stating only that her body appeared to have been untouched, but her face had been frozen in an expression of terror. As I read further, I found more names, students who had died under similar, mysterious conditions. All of them had been found in the library, their deaths unsolved. Some had been found in the same reading rooms, others in the aisles between bookshelves, but there was a common thread. Each one had been surrounded by blood, their bodies showing signs of extreme distress before their deaths. The most disturbing part was the note at the end of the file. The library is believed to be cursed. Several deaths have occurred under unexplained circumstances, particularly among those who spent long hours alone in the building. The words seemed to blur on the page, the weight of them pressing down on me. A curse. A curse tied to this place. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Was that what was happening to me? Was I being drawn into this curse, just like the others? I leaned back in the creaky chair, trying to make sense of the information. The deaths weren't just random. They were connected. And now I was part of the story, caught in the web of whatever dark force had claimed these students. The figure in the library, the blood on the pages, it wasn't just a hallucination. It wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. There was something real, something ancient, lurking in the library. And it was waiting for me. It was another late night. The kind of night when the library felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I had hoped that the strange encounter from the night before was just a bad dream, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The files, the history, the curse, it all tied together. And as much as I wanted to escape, I couldn't. There was a pull, a terrible curiosity that kept me coming back. I was alone in the library again, the only sound the hum of the overhead lights. The familiar smell of old books filled the air, but tonight it felt heavier. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. At first, I heard the rustling of pages, faint, as if someone had opened a book nearby. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to stay calm. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the wind had caused the pages to shift, or perhaps one of the library's older mechanisms was acting up. But then, the sound changed. It wasn't just the soft rustling of paper anymore. It was more distinct, more deliberate. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, measured, almost too quiet to be real, but unmistakable. I froze. My body went rigid, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The footsteps were coming closer. Each step was heavy, deliberate, like someone walking down the aisle toward me. But there was no one there. I quickly scanned the room, my eyes darting from corner to corner, trying to spot any movement. The library seemed impossibly still. The footsteps, though, were unmistakable, growing louder with each passing second. I took a slow step back, my breath caught in my throat. The footsteps continued, closer now. My pulse quickened as the sound of them echoed in the empty space. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to confront this. I had to know what was happening. I moved toward the aisle where the footsteps seemed to be coming from. As I rounded the corner, I saw nothing. The shelves were empty, the space ahead completely still. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were right there, just behind me now, each step growing louder, closer, until it felt like they were right next to me. I whipped around, panic clawing at my chest, but there was no one. Nothing. The aisle was completely empty. I stood there for a moment, gasping for air, my mind racing. I had heard those steps. I had felt the presence of someone, or something, right next to me. I backed away, my hand gripping the nearest shelf for support. My legs felt weak, like they might give out beneath me. The library felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. And then, as if in response to my panic, I heard it again. The sound of footsteps. But this time, it wasn't just one set of steps. There were two. They were moving in unison, walking toward me, their rhythm slow and deliberate. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them, each step echoing louder and louder in the silence of the library. I wasn't alone. And whatever it was getting closer. The footsteps stopped as suddenly as they had started. The silence returned, but it was a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press down on my chest. My heart was still racing, my hands trembling, and the sensation of being watched never left me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something that was both terrifying and inevitable. I hesitated for a moment, my breath shallow. The library stretched endlessly around me, its aisles disappearing into shadow. The shelves seemed to loom, as though waiting for something to step out from between them. I had to move. I couldn't just stand there. I forced myself forward, walking slowly, my eyes scanning every corner. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just out of sight, lurking in the darkness. My mind kept racing through the events of the past few days, each strange sound, each fleeting glimpse of the figure, the blood-stained pages. It was all connected. But how? Why me? And then, as I turned a corner into one of the quieter aisles, I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another shadow, a trick of the light. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. It was a person, a figure standing in the middle of the aisle, holding a book. I froze. The figure was dressed in an old-fashioned style, wearing a sweater and trousers that looked like they belonged to a time long past. The book in his hands looked ancient, its cover worn and faded. But it was the face that caught my attention, familiar, yet impossibly distant. The figure's face was pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to look right through me. He was focused on the pages of the book, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he hadn't noticed me at all. But there was something else. As I stared at him, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I realized with a jolt, this man, this ghost, looked like one of the students from the records I had found earlier. His face matched the description of a student who had died in the library many years ago. Daniel Marks. Daniel had been a promising history student, a regular in the library during his time at the university. According to the file, he had died under mysterious circumstances, his body found near the same aisle where I now stood. I couldn't breathe. The connection was clear now. This ghost, this student, was one of the many who had met their end here. And somehow, I was tied to it all. The ghost, Daniel, turned a page in the book, his eyes still locked on the text. He didn't acknowledge my presence, didn't even look up. But his movements were deliberate, as if he was stuck in an eternal cycle, reliving the moments leading up to his death over and over. I wanted to speak, to shout, to ask him what was happening, but the words stuck in my throat. I felt paralyzed, trapped between the living world and whatever this was. And then, as if sensing my presence, Daniel's head slowly lifted. His hollow eyes met mine, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. He didn't say a word, but the look on his face was enough. A mixture of sorrow and fear, as if he was trying to tell me something, but the message was lost in the empty space between us. I took a step back, my heart pounding, and the ghost returned to his book, as if nothing had happened. I couldn't understand it. How was this possible? How were these spirits trapped here? And why was I being drawn into their world? I turned to leave, but the feeling of being watched intensified. As I glanced back one last time, the ghost of Daniel Marks was gone, as if he had never been there at all. But the image of his face, his eyes locked on mine, stayed with me. The encounter with Daniel Marks' ghost haunted me long after I left the library that night. His hollow eyes, the way he stared at me without speaking, it felt like I had crossed into a world I couldn't understand. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the realization that I wasn't just seeing things. These were the spirits of the students whose deaths had been recorded. They hadn't moved on. They hadn't gone anywhere. They were trapped here, in this cursed place. I spent the next few days buried in the archives, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. I had to know more. I had to understand why the library was holding these souls, why they couldn't rest. I combed through every file, every old newspaper clipping, hoping for a clue that would piece it all together. The answer came unexpectedly. I found a dusty journal buried deep in the archives, its leather cover cracked and fragile with age. It belonged to a former librarian, one who had worked in the library during the early 1900s. The entries were cryptic, and most of them were written in a hurried scrawl, but there was one particular passage that made my blood run cold. The curse of the library is old, older than the books themselves. It has been passed down through generations, following those who dare to study in its walls. The spirits of those who die within the library are doomed to return, caught in a never-ending loop. Their souls cannot escape until the curse is broken, but no one knows how. Each death feeds the curse, drawing in more and more victims, binding them to this place. The words on the page blurred before my eyes. A curse. A curse that kept the spirits of the dead bound to the library, forcing them to relive their last moments over and over again. And the more I read, the more it became clear the curse had been feeding off the lives of the students for years. Every death added strength to its hold on the library. As I sat there, holding the journal in my hands, a chilling thought crossed my mind. I wasn't just a passive observer in this. I had become part of it. Every step I took within the library, every hour I spent among the books, had drawn me deeper into its grasp. I wasn't immune. I had been marked, just like the others. I thought back to Daniel Marks, his pale face frozen in time, the way he had looked at me as if he was trying to warn me. They were all trying to warn me. But what could I do? What could any of us do against something so ancient and powerful? I had to leave. The rational part of me screamed to get out, to run and never look back. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The library's grip on me had already tightened, and there was no escaping it now. The ghosts weren't just lingering in the library, they were trapped, doomed to relive their deaths over and over again. And unless something changed, I would join them. As the weight of the curse settled over me, I realized that finding an answer wasn't enough. It wasn't about knowing the truth anymore. It was about surviving. And that, I was beginning to fear, might not be possible. That night, everything felt different. The air was thick with tension, the kind of tension that coils in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I had spent hours in the library, poring over every piece of information I could find. I had learned more than I ever wanted to know about the curse. But knowledge brought no comfort. In fact, the more I learned, the more helpless I felt. The ghosts weren't just haunting the library, they were trapped. And now, so was I. I was leaving the archives, ready to head home for the night, but as I stepped into the hallway, I froze. I could hear it again, the rustling of pages, the faint whisper of footsteps in the distance. But this time, it was different. The sounds weren't distant. They were right here, closing in. I turned toward the sound, my pulse quickening. And then I saw them. At first, it was just a flicker, a shadow in the corner of my eye. But as I looked closer, the shadows took shape, figures, standing still, staring at me with hollow eyes. They were students, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces pale and ghostly. The same faces I had seen in the records. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my ears. The ghosts didn't move at first, but I could feel the weight of their gaze on me, their eyes boring into my soul. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. And then, as if on cue, the ghosts started to move. They stepped toward me slowly, deliberately. Their footsteps echoed in the empty hall, each step sending a shock of fear through my body. I turned and tried to run, but the library seemed to stretch on forever. I rushed through the aisles, my breath coming in short gasps, but no matter how fast I ran, the door to the exit was always just out of reach. I was running in circles, trapped in the labyrinth of bookshelves. I stopped, gasping for air, my mind spinning. I turned back to look behind me. The ghosts were closer now, their faces twisted in expressions of pain and longing. But it wasn't just the ghosts that terrified me. It was the realization that I couldn't leave. I ran to the nearest exit, my hands shaking as I reached for the door. But when I turned the handle, it wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, desperate, but it was as if the door had been sealed shut. I turned to try another exit, but the same thing happened. All the doors were locked. I was trapped. I couldn't understand it. How was this possible? The library had always had its exits. It had always been a place I could leave. But tonight, it was different. The doors were sealed, as if the library itself didn't want me to leave. I turned back toward the ghosts, my breath coming in ragged gasps. They were still coming, closing in around me, their eyes never leaving mine. I was surrounded. The ghosts had cornered me, and I couldn't escape. The fear that had been gnawing at me for days now became a suffocating pressure, as if the walls of the library were closing in, trapping me inside with them. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. The ghosts didn't speak either. They just watched me, their silent presence heavy with unspoken truths. It was then that I realized I wasn't just trapped in the library physically. I was trapped in a curse. The same curse that had claimed the lives of those students was now claiming me. I wasn't going to be able to leave, not until the curse allowed it. And that, I feared, might never happen. The silence in the library felt heavier than ever as I sat in the dimly lit reading room, my fingers trembling as I flipped through dusty, yellowed pages. The more I dug, the more I began to realize how deeply entrenched the curse was. Every scrap of information I uncovered seemed to lead to another, darker discovery, and the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place, though they only painted a more terrifying picture. I had spent the last few days sifting through archives, searching for anything that might explain why the library was so cursed, why these spirits couldn't rest. The more I learned, the more I realized I had made a grave mistake by staying. The curse wasn't just something that affected the dead, it was a force that would slowly drag anyone near it into its darkness. The records I found were unsettling, to say the least. Old newspaper clippings, personal journals from past librarians, and even the odd, fragmented police report. They all shared one thing in common: mysterious deaths, strange occurrences, and whispers of an ancient curse that had been tied to the library for centuries. One report caught my eye in particular. It was dated back to the early 1900s, a time when the university had just expanded its campus. The headline read, "Tragic Deaths of Students Linked to Library's Dark Past." The article described a series of bizarre and unexplained deaths of students who had frequented the library. They weren't accidents or random occurrences. No, these deaths were eerily similar. Each student, all of whom had been regulars in the library, had died in ways that defied explanation. Some vanished without a trace, others were found in strange states of delirium, their bodies covered in strange, unidentifiable marks. But the most chilling detail in the report was the consistent mention of the library itself. Local legend speaks of a curse that haunts the library. It is said that the spirits of past students, bound by an ancient force, remain trapped within its walls. Their fates are intertwined with the library's dark history, their deaths fueling the curse that holds them captive. The article ended with a statement from a concerned faculty member, a historian named Dr. Benjamin Carter. It was his notes that disturbed me the most. We are dealing with something far older than we can comprehend. The library was built upon sacred ground, and the curse has been passed down for generations. Those who have died in this place are not merely victims of chance. They are sacrifices, their lives taken to feed the curse that grows stronger with each passing year. Dr. Carter's words sent a shiver down my spine. The curse was not just something random or unlucky. It had been carefully crafted, a malevolent force that had claimed countless lives and was now closing in on me. I couldn't stop reading. I had to know more. The more I read, the more I understood how deeply I was entangled in this nightmare. Another document, this one a letter from a former librarian, revealed that strange occurrences had been reported long before the university even existed. The library had originally been a private collection, housed in a mansion that was built centuries ago by an eccentric scholar. The mansion was said to be located over an ancient burial site, and the scholar, obsessed with forbidden knowledge, had apparently opened a door to something darker than he could control. The scholar had disappeared, but his legacy lived on in the curse he had unwittingly set in motion. The letter described how, in the years following the mansion's transformation into a library, a number of people, students, faculty, even visiting scholars, had vanished under strange circumstances. Some had been found dead, others never seen again. And those who had witnessed the strange events spoke of shadows moving in the corners of their vision, whispers in the halls, and the feeling that they were being watched. It was becoming clear the curse had been passed down through generations, feeding on the deaths of those who dared to enter the library. Each death strengthened it, making it more powerful, more insidious. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was next. The ghosts I had seen, the strange sensations, the feeling of being trapped, they were not random. They were part of something larger, something that had been waiting for me all along. And yet, I knew I couldn't stop. I couldn't leave, not while I was so close to the truth. But what was I supposed to do with this knowledge? How could I possibly break a curse that had lasted for centuries? As the weight of the information settled on me, I realized one thing: I had to find a way out. The curse was alive, and if I didn't figure out how to stop it, I would be consumed by it, just like all the others before me. It was late, far later than I should have stayed, but the library had become my only refuge. The more I read, the more the world outside seemed distant, like I was trapped in a haze of half-remembered nightmares. The darkness in the library seemed to press against me, suffocating in its silence. I should have left, but a part of me, the part that feared the unknown more than the curse, wanted to understand, to know how to escape. But that night, as I combed through yet another batch of old journals, I realized too late that the library wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cage. And I wasn't alone. The air shifted first. A cold, creeping chill snaked through the aisles, making my breath visible in the flickering light of the desk lamp. I paused, my heart hammering, unsure if I had imagined it. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the overhead lights. Then, a sound. A shuffle of footsteps, soft, yet unmistakable. I froze. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination. The library was vast, filled with creaks and groans as it settled in the night. I looked around, the darkness stretching across the shelves, hiding the corners from view. But the sound continued, moving closer, the footfalls growing louder. I didn't know what compelled me to get up. Maybe it was the instinct to confront whatever it was, or maybe I was simply too scared to sit still. I turned the corner of the aisle and froze. There, standing just beyond the stacks of books, was a figure, a student, just like the others I'd seen in the records. His face was pale, his features distorted by the flickering light. But this time, something was different. His eyes, empty as they were, seemed to glimmer with an unnatural hunger. He wasn't simply watching me. He was glaring at me, his mouth twisted into something like a snarl. I couldn't move. The sight of him paralyzed me. Then, without warning, he lunged. The air around me seemed to go still, and I felt a cold rush of terror as the ghost's hands reached for me, his touch colder than ice. I stumbled backward, my legs unable to find their footing. But I could hear it, his voice, ragged and filled with fury. It wasn't words, just a guttural growl, like a creature caught in torment. My instinct took over, and I turned, running as fast as I could. My feet slammed against the floor, my heart beating wildly as I darted through the aisles, the sound of footsteps echoing behind me. But no matter how quickly I ran, I couldn't outrun him. The library had changed. The familiar aisles I knew so well now felt like a labyrinth, twisting and turning, expanding further than I remembered. The exit was always just out of reach, no matter how many corners I rounded. I reached the main doors, my hands shaking as I grabbed for the handle. But again, it wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, panic clawing at my throat. The door was locked. It had always been unlocked before, but now it was sealed tight. I turned, and there he was, standing in the shadows of the aisle, his face twisted in an expression of pure rage. The other ghosts were with him now, standing behind him in the darkness. They were silent, but I could feel their presence, a weight pressing in on me from every angle. I was surrounded. The walls seemed to close in, and I could feel my mind unraveling. The terror was overwhelming. It wasn't just the ghost's aggression that paralyzed me. It was the realization that no matter how fast I ran, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't leave. The library wasn't just holding me in place, it was trapping me here. I wasn't running from the ghosts anymore. I was running from something far worse, the curse itself. As the ghost advanced, his hands reaching toward me with unnatural speed, I understood. The curse didn't just keep the spirits bound to this place. It kept me here too. I wasn't going anywhere. I backed away, my breath coming in shallow gasps, but I was running out of space. The shelves loomed around me, pressing in from all sides. I was suffocating in the dark, in the quiet, in the unrelenting grip of the curse. Then, just as the ghost was about to reach me, the library's lights flickered and went out, plunging me into total darkness. I was alone with the ghosts now, trapped in a place where time and space no longer made sense, where the curse twisted reality itself. And no matter what I did, I knew I couldn't escape. I staggered back, my mind reeling, the darkness thick around me. My breath was ragged, my pulse pounding in my ears. The last few minutes, if they had even been minutes, felt like a blur. The ghosts. The way they moved, so swiftly, so quietly, yet with a malice that was all too clear. The feeling of being trapped, caught in a web I couldn't escape. I leaned against one of the towering bookshelves, the cold wood against my back grounding me in some way, as if I could somehow hold on to reality by staying in contact with something solid. But nothing felt real anymore. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand, shaking. My thoughts were scattered, my brain struggling to make sense of the chaos unfolding around me. I had to explain it, I told myself. There had to be a logical explanation for all of this. There had to be a way to make sense of it. I breathed in deeply, trying to steady my nerves. Okay. First, the ghosts. I had seen them before, but this time it was different. One of them had been aggressive, no, more than that. It had been enraged, desperate. And that wasn't normal. Was it? Ghosts, spirits, they didn't act that way. The stories I have read, they didn't mention anything like this. They described the spirits as lingering, trapped, maybe even sorrowful. But not angry like that. I pulled at the collar of my shirt, feeling the air grow cold once again. The temperature in the library was dropping, the chill creeping into my bones. It wasn't normal. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I had worked here for so long, and never had I experienced something like this before. I couldn't even remember when it started. Had it always been like this, and I'd never noticed? Or had something changed? The sounds, the footsteps, the whispers, could they have been my imagination? I had been reading for hours on end, my mind exhausted. But no, I knew I had seen what I had felt. The ghost's touch, the overwhelming sense of something sinister closing in. It had been too real, too tangible. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to regain control. Think. I had to think. I wasn't losing my mind. I couldn't be. I had to be sane. I had to. But then doubt crept in. What if this was all in my head? What if it wasn't the library at all, but something else? I had never experienced anything like this before, so why now? The way the walls seemed to close in, the way the shelves stretched on forever, the sensation that I wasn't alone, could all of this be the result of stress? Anxiety? My isolation? I had been spending so much time here, alone, reading old books, delving deeper into this mystery. What if I was just losing touch with reality? I rubbed my temples, trying to push the thoughts away. But they wouldn't leave. What if the curse wasn't just tied to the library, but to me? What if I had become so obsessed with the legends, with the ghosts, that I was starting to see things that weren't there? Could I be losing my grip on reality, slowly but surely? The thought was terrifying. The idea that I could no longer trust my own senses, that everything around me, these walls, these books, might not even be real. That the ghosts I saw might only exist in my fractured mind. That I wasn't trapped in a cursed library at all, but in a web of my own delusions. I glanced around the room, the shadows stretching across the floor, the shelves looming above me like silent giants. Was this real? Was I really here, standing in this cold, desolate place, or was it all just a figment of my imagination? I could hear the soft rustling of pages in the distance again. My heart skipped. Was it the wind? Was it my mind playing tricks on me? No, I had heard it before. I knew what it was. The sound of the pages turning, slow and deliberate, as though someone, or something, was reading. But the more I focused on it, the more uncertain I became. Was it just the sound of my own mind making things up, or was it something else? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I had to focus. I had to think logically. But every time I tried to piece together the truth, I only found more questions. The curse? The ghosts? Or was I just a man losing himself to something I couldn't control? Suddenly, I felt dizzy, like the world was spinning out of my reach. The walls around me seemed to blur, the edges of reality softening, as if I were standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite comprehend. My knees gave way, and I sank to the floor, trying to steady myself. But no matter how hard I tried, the answer eluded me. There was no logical explanation for any of this. The library was no longer just a place, it was a nightmare. A nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I closed my eyes again, trying to find some clarity, but instead, I saw the ghosts. The faces of the dead, watching me, waiting for me, their eyes hollow and endless. And in that moment, I couldn't tell if they were real or just fragments of my own spiraling thoughts. The line between reality and madness was growing thinner by the second. And I had no idea how to stop it. The library had always been a place of order, shelves lined with books, each one in its place. I had always felt a strange comfort in that order, in the quiet hum of the place. But now, as the minutes dragged on, something was shifting. The once familiar space was starting to feel foreign, like the very air had changed, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I stood in the middle of the aisle, my hands gripping the edges of a nearby shelf as if it were the only thing holding me upright. My heart raced, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the cold. It wasn't just the ghosts now. It was the library itself. The books, they were changing. I had first noticed it when I picked up one of the journals from the table. The pages weren't what they had been when I last looked at them. The ink on the pages had shifted, as if the words were being rewritten in front of my eyes. What had once been ordinary entries now seemed strange, filled with cryptic symbols and phrases that made no sense. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, certain it was a trick of the light, but when I looked again, the words were still there, distorted, warped. I turned the page and saw a face staring back at me, faint but unmistakable. One of the ghosts. No, that couldn't be real. It had to be my mind playing tricks on me. But the more I looked around the room, the more I realized I wasn't imagining things. The shelves themselves had begun to distort, the edges of the wood warping and twisting in unnatural angles. The books weren't just changing on the inside. The covers were different, too. Some were torn, others covered in strange symbols that seemed to shimmer under the dim light. The titles blurred, shifting from one to another as though they were alive, reshaping themselves into something sinister. And then I heard it. A whisper, faint, like the rustling of pages. I turned around, my breath caught in my throat. One of the ghosts stood in the distance, its form clearer now than it had been before. It wasn't just a shape in the dark anymore. It was a person. No, not a person. A specter. A student with hollow eyes and a face twisted in agony. The ghost's presence was palpable, like a weight pressing down on the very air. I couldn't look away. It was only when I heard a voice, soft, almost pleading, that I realized the ghost wasn't alone. There were others. More than I had seen before. They were scattered throughout the library, moving between the shelves, their faces pale and expressionless, their eyes locked onto me. Some were sitting at tables, flipping through books, others wandering aimlessly between the aisles. They didn't speak, but I could feel them watching me, following me with their dead eyes. I stumbled backward, my hands clutching at the nearest bookshelf for support. The sound of pages turning echoed through the air, slow, deliberate, as if the books themselves were turning, shifting, responding to the presence of the ghosts. The books weren't just changing on their own. They were calling to them. The dead. The ones trapped in this place. My head spun. I couldn't think clearly anymore. The books, the ghosts, everything was blending together in a horrifying symphony of noise and motion. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of their presence. The library was no longer just a place. It was alive, and it was closing in around me. I could feel the walls closing in. The aisles seemed longer, stretching out into the darkness. Every step I took felt like it was dragging me deeper into the madness of this place. I turned, looking for an escape, but the ghosts were everywhere now, filling the space. One of them stepped forward, closer this time. It was the same student I had seen earlier, but his form was sharper now, more distinct. His face was frozen in an expression of pain, his mouth opening as though to speak. But no words came. The silence was suffocating. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if the ground had rooted me to this spot, the weight of the library's curse holding me in place. The books began to shift faster, their pages turning with an eerie speed, the sound echoing through the library, louder now. The whispers grew, their voices indistinct but persistent, a chorus of the dead that surrounded me. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, like the space itself was suffocating me, pressing in from all sides. I glanced around, my eyes darting, searching for some way out. The doors were still locked, still unreachable. The walls had closed in, the shelves growing taller, the aisles longer, more labyrinthine. And then I saw it. Another figure in the distance, emerging from the shadows. It was another ghost, this one different, more distinct, with a face I recognized. A student who had vanished years ago, someone I had read about in the records. His face was pale, but his eyes were full of something darker, rage, perhaps? Or was it hunger? I couldn't tell. The ghosts were closing in now, surrounding me, their forms becoming more solid, more real. The library itself seemed to be shifting with them, bending to their will. The shadows around me seemed to pulse with life, as if the very air had become something tangible, something I couldn't escape. And that was when I realized the truth. I wasn't just trapped in this library with the ghosts. I was becoming part of it. I was becoming part of their curse. There was no escape. No way out. And soon, I would join them. The realization hit me like a blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of me. It wasn't just my mind playing tricks. This was real. The library wasn't just a building full of books and knowledge, it was something else, something far darker. And it was holding me here. Trapping me. The ghosts were not merely haunting it. They were bound to it, and so, it seemed, was I. I staggered back, the cold walls pressing in tighter. The weight of the place, the oppressive silence broken only by the sound of rustling pages and faint whispers, was unbearable. I had always thought of the library as a sanctuary, a place of knowledge, of quiet. But now it felt like a prison. And worse, like it was alive. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that it was just the stress, the long hours spent here alone. I had to be overthinking it, I told myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just stress or fatigue. There was something in the air, something ancient, something malevolent that had seeped into the very walls of this place. My hand shook as I reached for the nearest book, but the cover felt wrong under my fingertips. It was colder than it should have been, its surface smooth and slick like something unnatural. I opened it, hoping to ground myself in something real, but the words were gone. The pages were blank, just a void of light, as though the book itself had been erased. I slammed it shut, my breath shallow. The library wasn't just changing the books, it was erasing them, rewriting reality itself. It was as if the very fabric of this place had come undone, and now I was caught in the unraveling threads. The ghosts? They weren't just manifestations of the past, they were the library's prisoners, its victims, and now it was trying to claim me as one of its own. I felt a cold pressure building inside my chest, the same pressure that had been suffocating me ever since I stepped foot in this cursed place. My heart raced, my throat tightened as I tried to breathe, but the air felt thicker, harder to take in. Every instinct told me to run, to break free, but the doors, they were still locked. I could feel it. The library itself was holding me in place. The shelves seemed to close in, the aisles narrowing, the once familiar paths twisting into impossible angles. The books shifted again, their titles unreadable, the covers warped and deformed. The walls stretched taller, darker, as if the library itself was alive and breathing, drawing me deeper into its endless corridors. It felt like being in a maze with no exit, and the longer I stayed, the more I realized that the maze wasn't just physical, it was psychological, a trap set to ensnare not only my body, but my mind. I turned around, my eyes frantically scanning the room, desperate to find some way out, but the ghosts were still there. They were watching me now, no longer just passive figures. They were moving closer, their faces twisted in expressions I couldn't quite place. Fear? Anger? Desperation? One of them stepped forward. A woman, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her lips moved in slow, deliberate motions, forming words I couldn't hear, yet somehow I understood. She was trying to warn me. Trying to tell me that I was already part of this place, that I was already caught in the curse, just like them. The cold pressure in my chest grew tighter. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. The library was no longer just a space of books and knowledge. It was a living thing, a dark presence that fed off the souls it trapped. And now, it had me. I reached out, my hands grasping at the nearest bookshelf, my mind racing. I had to escape. I had to. But then I froze. My reflection in the glass of the nearest window was wrong. It wasn't me staring back. The figure in the glass was distorted, twisted, its face pale and empty, its eyes hollow, just like the ghosts surrounding me. I was one of them now. I had become a part of the library, just like the others. A prisoner in a place that didn't just hold the dead, it consumed them. I staggered back, panic rising in my chest, but I couldn't move fast enough. The library, its books, the ghosts, they were all closing in, encircling me, binding me to this place. There was no escape. No way out. The library had claimed me, just as it had claimed them. I was trapped, lost in time, a part of its cursed existence, doomed to remain here forever, like all the others. And the worst part was, I knew it. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the library seemed to press in tighter, their cold, lifeless presence a constant reminder that I was trapped here. The library, which had once felt like a place of knowledge and quiet, was now a tomb, its halls echoing with the footsteps of the dead. The ghosts surrounded me, their hollow eyes watching me, as though they could sense the terror growing inside me. But the terror wasn't just fear of the unknown anymore, it was the knowledge that I had to understand. I had to learn what had happened to them, to the students who had died. I couldn't just be trapped here, lost in their endless torment. There had to be a reason for all of this. Some answer. Some explanation. I wandered through the library, trying to piece together the fragments of what I knew. The ghosts, the books, the twisted shelves. They weren't just random occurrences. They were all connected. But how? I returned to the old records room, the one where I'd first discovered the faint traces of the curse. There, on the dusty shelves, were records, paper files, and brittle books detailing the history of the library, the students, and their strange deaths. Each one of them seemed to have been linked to this place in some way. But the records were fragmented, as if someone had intentionally hidden or destroyed the most crucial pieces. I grabbed one of the older files from the shelf, flipping it open. It was a student's file, well, what was left of it. The page was yellowed and torn, the ink faded. The name at the top was barely readable, Margaret Wills. I traced my fingers over the name, trying to make sense of the rest of the text. She was a student who had been studying in the library the night she disappeared. According to the record, no one knew what had happened to her. She had simply vanished. There were rumors of strange sounds in the library late at night, whispers of something dark lurking within the stacks. The authorities had been called in, but no one could explain her disappearance. The file was sealed, marked as unsolved, with a note at the bottom, under investigation, unexplained disappearance, possible paranormal involvement. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the file. This was the first real lead I had found. But there were others. More records. More students whose deaths or disappearances seemed to be connected to the library. I pulled more files, one after the other. Each story was eerily similar. Students who had been seen studying late into the night, working alone in the quiet aisles, only to vanish without a trace. Some had been found dead, others were never seen again. I couldn't ignore it. The pattern was too clear. The library, it seemed, had claimed them all. But how? Why? As I sifted through the records, I found a reference to a curse, not just an ordinary one, but something tied to the very foundation of the library itself. A note from one of the university's early historians mentioned something about a dark ritual performed on the land before the library was built. The ritual, she wrote, was meant to bind knowledge to the place, but it had gone horribly wrong. The result was a curse that tethered the souls of those who perished in the library to the building, trapping them in an eternal cycle of torment and reading. The historian had believed that the curse could be broken, but her notes were unclear. Some pages had been ripped out, leaving only vague references to a ritual that required the destruction of something within the library. But what? What was this object? What could be destroyed to break the curse? I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the final line of the historian's note. The library consumes all who dare seek answers within its walls. The words echoed in my mind, and I knew in my gut that they weren't just a warning. They were a statement of fact. I wasn't just investigating a curse, I was living it. As the weight of the library's history pressed down on me, I realized the truth. I couldn't just leave. I couldn't run from this. Not anymore. I had to find a way to break the curse. Or else I would become one of them. Trapped in the endless cycle of death and reading. Forever a part of the library, bound by its curse. But first, I needed to understand what had gone wrong. What had happened to those students? Why had they died? And most importantly, what did I need to do to free myself? I couldn't afford to waste time. I had to finish the investigation. As I wandered deeper into the library's hidden corners, a strange feeling began to settle over me. I wasn't just searching for answers anymore, I was hunting for something. Something hidden. Something that had been deliberately obscured, perhaps even sealed away by those who came before me. The very air seemed to hum with the weight of unspoken secrets, as if the library itself was warning me to stop. But I couldn't stop. Not now. There had to be something more. Something that could explain the curse and, hopefully, offer a way out. I was back in the lower level of the library, the forgotten space where I had once heard rumors of a sealed room. It had been closed off long ago, the entrance concealed behind rows of old, dust-covered shelves. No one had ventured into it for years, maybe decades. But something drew me there, a pull that I couldn't ignore. I had no idea what I was looking for, but the deeper I went, the more the room felt familiar. The floor creaked beneath my weight as I searched for a way to open the door, my heart racing with anticipation. I ran my hands along the walls, tracing their cold, stone surface, searching for a hidden latch, a mechanism, anything. And then, I found it. A small, almost imperceptible seam in the stone, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. My fingers brushed over it, and with a faint groan, the door slid open. The hinges were stiff with age, but the passageway beyond beckoned me forward, darker and colder than anything I had encountered in the library before. I stepped into the room, the air thick with dust and decay. The dim light from my flashlight barely illuminated the surroundings, but I could make out the outlines of long-forgotten shelves and crumbling stacks of old books. The smell of mildew and old paper filled the air, but there was something else, something more unsettling about the room. It felt wrong, like I wasn't meant to be there. As I moved deeper into the room, my flashlight flickered over a large wooden desk. The surface was covered in layers of dust, but something caught my eye, an object half buried beneath the detritus. I knelt down, brushing away the dirt, and uncovered what appeared to be an old book. It was in surprisingly good condition, considering the state of the room, but the leather binding was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. I carefully opened the book, my hands trembling. The pages were brittle, but the text was legible. It wasn't just any book, it was a grimoire. A book of dark knowledge, possibly tied to the curse that had consumed the library. Its pages were filled with symbols I didn't recognize, arcane runes and diagrams that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. As I flipped through the pages, one particular section stood out. It described a ritual, something that could bind a soul to a place, trapping it in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. But there was more. It spoke of a counter-ritual, a way to break the curse, though it was incomplete. The text was damaged, the ink smeared, and many of the words were indecipherable. What was left, however, was a single line that caught my attention. To free the trapped souls, the source of the curse must be destroyed, but it lies within the very walls of the library. The words struck me like a lightning bolt. I had always known that the curse was tied to the library itself, but this was the confirmation I needed. There was something inside the library, something ancient and dark, that was at the heart of the curse. And in order to break free, I would have to destroy it. But what was it? And where could I find it? The book didn't give me any more answers. Its pages were crumbling, the ink bleeding into the paper, making it almost impossible to read further. But I had seen enough. The answer was within the library, somewhere hidden, waiting to be uncovered. I carefully closed the book, feeling a strange sense of unease. It felt like the library itself was watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. I had found the key to the curse. But it wasn't enough. I needed to find the source. Whatever it was that lay hidden in the walls of this cursed place, I had to destroy it. Only then could I hope to escape. The library wasn't just a trap. It was a prison, and I had to find a way to break out before it consumed me completely. I sat alone in the dusty, forgotten room, the book before me, its ancient pages still faintly glowing under the dim light of my flashlight. My breath came in shallow bursts, the weight of what I had discovered settling heavily on my chest. The book wasn't just a record of the curse, it was a warning, a map to something far darker, far more powerful than I had ever imagined. The room felt colder now, the air thick with the oppressive presence of something ancient and malicious. I knew that I had to keep reading, but I could feel the weight of something unseen watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I couldn't stop now. I had no choice but to keep going. The book was more than a grimoire, it was a record of events long past, a chronicle of dark rituals and prophecies that seemed to have been written for one purpose only, to preserve the curse that had consumed the library. The more I read, the more I understood that this wasn't just a curse, it was a living, breathing thing, capable of devouring everything in its path. The first prophecy I found was marked in the book with a symbol I'd seen before, one of the runes from the strange diagrams. It read, "When the moon is full and the library's doors stand open to the past, the souls of the lost will walk once more, bound to the land by the blood of the innocent. Their voices will whisper in the night, and the curse will join them in their eternal torment." My heart raced as I read those words. The moon that night. The doors of the library had been open when I first heard the whispers, and I had felt their presence before. The lost souls, the ghosts of the students, they were the ones in torment, bound to the library forever. And I had become part of their fate just by being here. I flipped through the pages, desperate to find more. There were more prophecies, each one more chilling than the last. One passage described a student who had tried to escape the curse, only to be consumed by the very walls of the library. Another spoke of a ritual, a failed attempt to break the curse, which had only strengthened the dark force that controlled the place. But it was the final prophecy that froze my blood in my veins. It was written in the same smudged ink as the others, but the words were clear. The one who seeks the truth will be the one to break the curse, or become its final victim. To destroy the source of the darkness, the one who has crossed the threshold must take the final step and destroy the heart of the library, where it began. But beware, the heart is not what it seems. To destroy it is to become it, and the library will claim your soul as its own. The words were like a death sentence. To destroy the source of the curse, the heart of the library, would mean my end. But it was the only way. If I didn't act, if I didn't destroy whatever dark force had bound this place, I would be trapped here forever, lost among the whispers of the dead. The room seemed to close in on me as I processed the prophecy. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, searching for more clues, more answers. But the more I read, the more I realized there was no way out. The curse had already claimed so many before me, students, scholars, and even those who had dared to investigate it. I was just the next in line. I slammed the book shut, my mind racing with the implications. The heart of the library, whatever that was, held the key to my survival. But destroying it would come at a price. A terrible, irreversible price. I could feel the weight of the curse pressing on me now. It wasn't just a presence anymore, it was in me, growing within me, twisting my thoughts, clouding my mind. I was becoming part of it, and if I didn't act soon, I would lose myself entirely. But how could I destroy the heart? And what would it mean for me, for my soul, to take that final step? I had no answers, only a deep, gnawing fear that the time to act was running out. The library was closing in around me, and I was no longer sure if I was in control. Was it the curse that was guiding me, or had I already become a puppet of the library's dark will? The deeper I delved into the book, the more it seemed that I was not alone in the library. At first, I tried to convince myself that the growing sense of unease, the cold creeping up my spine, was just my imagination. But as the night stretched on, I could feel the air shift. It wasn't just a feeling. It was real. I was being watched. I had grown used to the whispers, those soft, unsettling murmurs that seemed to echo through the halls when no one was around. But now, they weren't whispers. They were voices, clear and distinct, rising from the darkness, pulling me in. I tried to focus on the book in front of me, but the words blurred, becoming impossible to read as the noise intensified. The first real interaction came suddenly. It wasn't a sound, but a movement. I glanced up, my pulse quickening. In the far corner of the room, a shadow shifted. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of movement, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something was there. The figure was not clear at first, just a vague silhouette, but as it moved closer, I saw the outline of a person. A student. The same as the others. This one had a face, but it was pale and contorted in a way that wasn't human. Its eyes were wide, hollow, empty voids, and its lips stretched into a grotesque smile as it approached. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. But the figure didn't seem to notice me. Instead, it moved toward the desk where I had been reading, its fingers brushing against the ancient pages of the book, causing the pages to flutter violently as though they were alive. I could feel my own breath catch in my throat, my body paralyzed. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was trapped, not just by the walls of the library, but by the ghosts that now filled it. There was no escape from them, not anymore. The air grew colder, and the darkness pressed in closer. More figures began to materialize around me, flickering in and out of existence like distorted memories. I could hear their footsteps now, slow, deliberate, dragging along the dusty floor. They were circling me, moving as though they knew exactly where I was, even though I couldn't see them all. I could feel their eyes on me, cold and accusing. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat. I wanted to ask them why they were here, what they wanted from me, but I couldn't form the words. The book had told me they were trapped, bound to the library by the curse, but now they felt different. They weren't just passive spirits anymore. They were aware, and they were hungry. A cold hand suddenly brushed against my shoulder, and I gasped, spinning around, but no one was there. My breath came in shallow bursts, my hands trembling as I turned back to the book. The pages had changed again, the words shifting and rearranging themselves into a different script, one I couldn't understand. The ghosts were interacting with the book too. The knowledge within it was changing, warping, as if they were feeding on it. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't even understand what they wanted, but I could feel them growing stronger, more powerful with every passing moment. The figure from earlier, the student with the hollow eyes, turned its face toward me. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, I felt its voice, a cold, clammy presence in my mind. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice reverberating in the very air around me. "You are ours now. The library is your home, and the curse is in your blood." I recoiled, but the figure stepped closer, its breath icy against my skin. The other spirits closed in as well, their forms solidifying, each one pressing in around me, cutting off any chance of escape. I was surrounded. The air was thick with the weight of the dead, and their presence suffocated me. The very walls of the library seemed to bend and twist, as though they were alive, responding to the ghost's energy. I was no longer in control of my own thoughts. The library had taken something from me, and in return, it had given me nothing but fear. I realized then that the ghosts were not just lingering in the shadows, they were part of the library, as much a part of it as the walls, the shelves, the books. They were the heart of the curse, and I had no way of knowing how deep the darkness went. I had hoped to find a way out, but I wasn't sure if there even was one anymore. The library had taken root in me, and I was beginning to understand that there would be no escaping it. Not without becoming one of them. Not without becoming a part of the curse. I had to act. But I no longer knew if I was strong enough. The ghosts weren't just wandering aimlessly, as I had first assumed. They were searching for something, just as I had been. As I observed them, my breath caught in my throat. They weren't just the tormented souls of students who had once inhabited this place. They were restless, desperate, and their movements were purposeful, as though they were looking for something specific. I watched one ghost, a young man dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothes, hovering near the shelves, his translucent fingers tracing the spines of books as though seeking something hidden between the pages. He would pause, pull a book from the shelf, and flip through it frantically, his movements growing more erratic with each passing second. But after only a few moments, he would discard the book and move on to the next one, repeating the same search again and again, each time with increasing frustration. The other spirits were doing the same, each one absorbed in its own search. They weren't simply lost or wandering aimlessly. They were hunting for something. The idea struck me like a bolt of lightning. They were looking for information. They were searching for something in the books, some kind of knowledge that could break the curse. Perhaps a clue, a ritual, or an answer that would allow them to escape this hellish prison. It made sense. What else could they be doing, trapped in this library for eternity? What else could they hope for, other than release? But the more I watched, the more I realized something terrifying. The ghosts weren't just searching for freedom. They were searching for the key to their freedom, and it was something they believed only I could help them find. I felt a chill run down my spine. As the ghostly figures moved through the library, their presence growing stronger with each passing minute, I felt my own thoughts begin to shift. The world around me started to feel different, thick with a sense of inevitability, as though I was no longer an outsider looking in. I was becoming part of it. The more I focused on the search, the more I felt myself drawn into it, as if the curse itself was wrapping around me, tightening its grip on my mind. I opened a book on a nearby shelf, hoping to distract myself, but as soon as I touched the pages, I could feel the pull. The words seemed to shift in front of my eyes, twisting and rearranging themselves. They were no longer just letters and symbols. They were alive. The more I read, the more I felt the library's presence in me. I was no longer simply an observer. I was becoming a participant in the same search the ghosts were. My fingers traced the pages, and for a moment, I thought I heard a whisper in my ear. It was soft at first, but it grew louder. "Help us," it said. "Find it, you know where it is." I froze, my heart pounding. I hadn't heard that voice before, but it was familiar. It was the voice of the young man who had been searching near the shelves. I looked up, and his ghostly form was standing right in front of me now, his hollow eyes locked on mine. "Help us," he repeated, his voice a guttural rasp. His face twisted in agony, his body flickering like a dying light bulb. I stumbled back, my hands shaking. The more I studied the spirits, the more I realized that I wasn't just looking for answers, I was becoming part of their world. The line between the living and the dead was blurring. The curse was pulling me in, just as it had pulled them. And the more I learned about what they were searching for, the more I began to understand I was the key. Somehow, I had become intertwined with the curse, and the information they sought had become something I was now bound to. I looked back at the book in my hands. Its pages were no longer just words, they were maps, rituals, paths to an escape that I wasn't sure I wanted to take. The ghosts, they weren't the only ones searching. I was searching too. Searching for a way out of this nightmare. But every time I uncovered something new, the knowledge felt like a weight, like I was giving up a piece of myself to the darkness. The more I learned, the more I was becoming like them, one of the lost, one of the trapped. The ghost's search for freedom was now my search. And with each page I turned, I felt myself sinking deeper into their world. They weren't the only ones lost in this place anymore. I was lost too, and I wasn't sure I would ever find my way out. The further I delved into the ancient books, the more I could feel the curse tightening around me. The whispers from the ghosts had stopped being whispers. They had become voices, real and insistent, pressing on my thoughts, urging me to keep reading. "Help us," they begged. "Find it. The key is in the ritual." At first, I resisted. I tried to close the books, to block out the voices, to remind myself that this wasn't real, that I wasn't becoming a part of their world. But the harder I fought, the more it felt like I was sinking deeper, like the library itself was pulling me into its dark embrace. There was no escape. One evening, as I sat surrounded by books in a dimly lit corner of the library, a piece of information finally surfaced, something that broke through the fog of confusion and fear. I had been reading a text about the library's history when a sentence caught my eye, buried in the middle of a paragraph, as though it had been placed there deliberately. The spirits of the lost students are bound to the library by an ancient ritual, a ritual that must be completed before they can move on. I froze, my eyes scanning the words again, trying to make sense of them. What ritual? What had they been forced to do? And why was it that I, a student working late into the night, was now involved in it? I flipped through the pages desperately, trying to find more. The ritual, I learned, was not something voluntary. It had been performed long ago, not by the students, but by a group of scholars who sought forbidden knowledge. They had made a pact with something dark, something powerful, in order to gain wisdom beyond their time. But the price of that wisdom had been more than they could ever have imagined. The ritual had bound the souls of the scholars, and later, the students who had unknowingly stumbled upon the curse, to the library, tying them to its walls for eternity. The only way they could ever be freed was if someone completed the ritual, if someone willingly offered up their soul to the curse in exchange for their release. I felt my heart race as the realization hit me. The ghosts weren't just trapped here because of the curse. They were waiting for someone to finish the ritual, waiting for someone to sacrifice themselves in order to break their chains. And now, I was that someone. I began to understand why the ghosts had been watching me, why they had been so insistent. They weren't just seeking freedom, they were seeking a replacement. Someone to take their place. Someone to complete the ritual. And the more I researched, the more I realized that I had been chosen. The ritual had called to me. It had been waiting for me, just as the ghosts had been waiting for someone to release them. I had thought I was just investigating, seeking knowledge to understand what had happened here. But it wasn't just knowledge that I was gaining, it was power. A power that had been passed down through the centuries, drawing me closer to the heart of the curse. I couldn't escape it. The more I read, the more I understood, there was no way out. I was a part of it now. I was tied to the library, tied to the ritual. And as I turned another page, I found the last piece of the puzzle. The words in the book explained everything, the exact moment when the ritual would be complete, when the last living soul in the library offered themselves willingly to the curse. I am the last living soul. The realization hit me like a wave, drowning me in terror. There was no one left but me. The ghosts were waiting for me to make the final choice, to complete the ritual, to end the curse. But what would happen to me if I did? Would I become like them? Would I be bound to the library for eternity? I felt my legs tremble beneath me as I closed the book, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The library seemed to grow darker, the shadows pressing closer. The ghosts were watching me now, their empty eyes fixed on me, their presence growing stronger. They knew that I was the one they had been waiting for. I could feel them surrounding me, their cold fingers brushing against my skin, urging me to act, to complete the ritual. The weight of their gaze was unbearable, and I realized with a sickening certainty that I had no choice anymore. I had already become a part of their world, and the ritual would not let me leave. The library had claimed me, and the beginning of the end had come. The air in the library had thickened, as if the very walls were closing in around me. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. The ghosts were no longer just shadows or fleeting figures in the corner of my eye. They were there, all around me, standing just beyond the reach of my vision, their cold, unblinking eyes following every move I made. The whispers had turned into a cacophony, a maddening chorus of voices all calling out to me, their words indistinguishable, their tones pleading and accusing. They surrounded me, their forms flickering in and out of existence, each ghost more distinct than the last. Some were students, their faces etched with fear and confusion. Others were unrecognizable, twisted in agony. All of them, however, shared one thing in common. They were watching me, waiting for something. And then, as if drawn by some invisible force, they began to move closer. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, my hands trembling. The ghosts were real, their presence undeniable. I could feel the cold emanating from them, a chill that seemed to seep into my very bones. But there was something more, something deeper than their haunting presence. Their touch, their eyes, they weren't just a part of the physical world anymore. They were in my mind, too. One of the ghosts, a woman with hollow eyes and a blood-stained gown, reached out with a trembling hand. The moment her fingers brushed against my skin, a jolt of icy electricity shot through me. My head spun, my vision blurred, and the whispers grew louder, drowning out everything else. "You're one of us now," the voice echoed in my mind, chilling and distant. "You can't escape. You'll never leave." I gasped, staggering back, but the library seemed to shift around me. The walls stretched and warped, the shelves grew taller, the air heavier. The familiar layout of the library was disappearing, replaced by a twisting, nightmarish version of itself. It was as if the ghosts were pulling me into their reality, bending the space around me to their will. I tried to shake the sensation off, tried to focus on the world around me, but it was useless. The more I tried to resist, the more the ghosts pushed against me, the more they invaded my thoughts. Their presence was no longer confined to the physical realm. It was in my mind, in my soul. Another ghost materialized in front of me, a young man with hollow cheeks and an expression of pure terror. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt an overwhelming urge to look away, but I couldn't. The moment I made eye contact with him, I felt his thoughts flooding my mind, images of fear, pain, and confusion. "It's too late for you," he whispered, his voice both outside and inside my head. "We're all trapped here, just like you will be. There is no way out." The world around me seemed to bend and collapse, and I could feel myself slipping, like I was losing control of my own thoughts. I tried to focus, tried to remember who I was, but the more I struggled, the more the ghosts wrapped themselves around me, pulling me deeper into their world. I could no longer tell where their thoughts ended and mine began. The boundaries between us had disappeared, and I was drowning in their collective consciousness. My body felt numb, my mind fragmented, as though I was becoming less and less human, more and more a part of the cursed souls that lingered in the library. "Help us." The voices grew louder, more insistent. "Find the ritual. Finish it. Set us free." But with every word they spoke, I could feel myself unraveling. The pressure in my head grew unbearable, and I sank to my knees, clutching my temples in an attempt to block out the onslaught of voices. The ghosts were no longer just haunting me from the outside, they were inside me, consuming me from within. The library seemed to stretch on forever, the shelves now towering impossibly high, the books twisting into grotesque shapes. I was surrounded, trapped in a nightmare that had no end. The ghosts were closing in, and I could no longer distinguish their thoughts from mine. I was becoming one of them. And then, amidst the chaos, I heard it, the voice. A voice so clear, so sharp, that it cut through the madness like a knife. You are the key. The voice wasn't from any of the ghosts I had encountered before. It was different. You have the power to end this. But you must choose. I didn't understand. What did it mean? Who was speaking to me? But as I turned to face the source of the voice, I realized the truth. The ghosts weren't the only ones influencing me. The curse itself was alive. And it was speaking through me now. I was no longer just a victim. I was part of the curse. Part of the ritual. Part of the library. And there was no turning back. The ghosts were waiting. The ritual was waiting. And the library was waiting for me to make my final choice. The cold fingers of the ghosts were tightening around my throat, squeezing out any rational thought, leaving only a gnawing panic that threatened to consume me. The library had turned into a labyrinth of shifting shadows and whispers, a place where reality itself seemed to bend and break. But somewhere, in the darkest corner of my mind, there was still a sliver of hope. Perhaps the book could save me. I clutched the cursed tome tightly in my hands. Its pages felt alive, pulsating under my fingers, as if the book itself knew what I was about to do. I had read it cover to cover, scouring the text for a way to banish the ghosts, to end the curse. There had to be something I had missed. The ritual. The key to breaking the chain. The words were etched in my memory now, burned into my mind like a mantra. I had to recite them, had to perform this ceremony to sever the ghosts from this place, to free myself and them from the library's grip. I had no choice. I couldn't stay here, not with their eyes constantly watching, not with their voices constantly in my head. I stood in the center of the library, my heart pounding, the book trembling in my hands as I began to speak the words. The air around me thickened, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath fogging in the dim light. The ghosts stopped moving, their haunting murmurs fading into an eerie silence. For a moment, I thought it was working. The ghosts had paused, their forms still as statues. But then I noticed something I had missed in my panic. Their eyes. They weren't afraid. They weren't pleading anymore. They were waiting. The words I had spoken echoed around me, their power resonating through the library's walls, but instead of banishing the ghosts, it felt as though the library itself shifted in response. The shelves groaned, the walls seemed to close in tighter. The shadows lengthened. I felt a cold, sharp pain in my chest, like something was ripping through my soul. It was as though the ghosts were feeding off my fear, feeding off the energy I was pouring into the ritual. They were using it, bending it to their will, manipulating the ritual I had tried to perform. The voices started again, louder this time, drowning out the whispers from before. They didn't speak words now, they screamed. You cannot escape. You cannot save us. The room spun as I tried to hold onto the book, but it felt like the very words were slipping from my grasp. The ritual wasn't working. It wasn't breaking the curse, it was feeding it. My legs buckled beneath me, and I fell to the floor, clutching the book to my chest. The ghosts weren't leaving, they were getting stronger, more insistent. I could feel their cold presence pressing in on me, pushing me down, drowning me in their despair. The shadows around me grew longer, darker, consuming everything in sight. The truth hit me like a freight train. The ritual wasn't meant to banish them. It had never been meant to free them. It was designed to trap anyone who tried to break the curse, to bind them to the library just like the rest. The book had lied. The ritual had lied. It wasn't a solution, it was a trap. As the ghosts closed in, their forms warping and shifting around me, I realized the horrifying truth. The library wasn't just a place of death. It was a living thing, feeding off the souls of those it had claimed. The ghosts, the curse, they were all part of it. And the book, the very source I had hoped would free me, was just another piece of the library's insidious design. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath, but the oppressive air was too thick. The ghosts were all around me now, their faces twisting in agony, their eyes locked onto mine. I could feel their hands reaching out, their cold touch wrapping around me like chains. The ritual hadn't worked. There was no escape. The library had already claimed me, just as it had claimed them. And now, I was one of them. The walls of the library seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as though the curse itself was breathing, expanding. And I realized then, I was never meant to escape. I was meant to join them, to become another lost soul wandering the endless halls of the library for eternity. The shadows closed in, and I was swallowed by the dark. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with the weight of realization. My breath hitched in the cold air, but it wasn't just the chill of the library that gripped me, it was something far deeper, far darker. The ghosts, their faces twisted with agony, remained still, hovering just at the edge of my vision. I could feel them, their presence pressing on me from every angle. I had failed. I had tried to escape, to break the curse, to find a way out. But the truth was now clear to me in a way I could no longer ignore. The curse wasn't something you could escape. The ritual hadn't failed because I didn't perform it correctly. It had failed because it was never meant to free me. It was designed to trap me. To trap all of us. I had spent so long thinking about the ghosts as if they were victims, trapped in this place against their will, seeking release. But the truth was far more horrifying. The ghosts were not merely trapped, they were part of the library itself. Their souls, their very essence, had been bound to the shelves, to the books, to the endless rows of pages. They were not wandering spirits who had died, they were stuck. And so was I. As I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest, I saw it with fresh eyes. The library wasn't just a building. It wasn't a mere collection of books and rooms. It was alive, a sentient being that fed off the souls it captured. The ghosts weren't wandering aimlessly. They were bound to this place forever, never able to leave, never able to find peace. They were part of the very walls, part of the air, part of the shadows. Their cries, their whispers, they were the library's heartbeat, a constant reminder of the souls it had claimed. I turned, desperate to find something, anything, that could help me escape, but the shelves seemed to stretch endlessly before me. The doors were no longer there. The windows were dark, blocked by shadows that seemed to move, shift, and breathe. There was no way out. There never had been. I had been here long enough to know that now. The ghosts stared at me, their expressions twisted with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Their faces, once the faces of students, of people who had lived, had become hollow, empty. Their eyes were nothing but black pits of despair. They had no bodies, no flesh. They were just souls, trapped in this place, cursed to wander through eternity, searching for answers that would never come. And then, a voice, so faint, so distant, yet so clear, whispered in my ear. I couldn't tell if it was real or just a product of my mind breaking under the pressure, but it felt like it came from everywhere. You were always meant to join us. I recoiled, my heart racing. No. This couldn't be. I had fought, I had struggled to find a way out, to break free. but now I understood. The ghosts, those poor, tormented souls, hadn't been searching for freedom. They had been searching for company. They were trapped in this place, yes, but they weren't alone. And neither would I be. The absence of physical death, the thing that had once given me hope, now felt like a curse. There was no end. There was no release. The ghosts weren't simply lost spirits, they were entombed here, as I would be. I could feel the weight of their endless gaze, pressing down on me. Their whispers filled the air, a constant hum in the back of my mind, growing louder, more desperate. I was one of them now, trapped in this library, trapped in this endless cycle of searching and despair. I would never escape. I would never find peace. And just like them, I would wander these halls forever, my soul lost to the darkness. There was no freedom here. There never had been. The weight of the library was crushing me, its oppressive presence threatening to swallow me whole. But amid the darkness, amid the despair that had gripped my soul, there was still a flicker of something, anger. A spark of defiance that refused to die, no matter how far I had fallen into the depths of this nightmare. I stood in the center of the library, surrounded by the spirits of those long lost. Their cold eyes, their hollow faces, every single one of them looked at me as if they had accepted their fate. But I hadn't. Not yet. I couldn't. I was not like them. I would not be lost here, wandering these endless corridors, doomed to repeat the same motions for eternity. No. I had to find the truth. I had to understand what had happened to these souls, why they were trapped. And if I could, just if, I had to stop this curse. The book still lay in my hands, heavy with the knowledge I had yet to comprehend. I could feel it now, its power pulsing through me, filling me with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt before. It wasn't just a book anymore. It was my key to the truth. The only thing that could break the cycle. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The ghosts around me had started to close in, their voices rising in a low murmur. Some were angry, some were pleading, others merely whispered their endless sorrow. But I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I had already seen the worst they could offer. It was time to face whatever lay at the heart of this curse. I walked toward the center of the library, toward the shelves that had once seemed so familiar, but now felt like the jaws of a trap. The shadows seemed to twist and stretch before me, reaching for me, pulling me back. But I fought against them, forcing myself forward, determined to find the answers I needed. The book trembled in my hands. The pages fluttered as if responding to my will, almost alive in their eagerness. I flipped through the pages, searching for something, anything, that could tell me how to break this curse. The voices in my head grew louder, but I couldn't let them distract me. I had to focus. I had to understand. There, on the very last page of the book, was the answer I had been searching for. It wasn't a ritual this time. It wasn't an incantation or some cryptic spell. It was a choice. The curse could only be undone by destroying the heart of the library. The place where it all began, the source of its power. The very essence of the library itself. I looked around, my heart pounding. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The library was the curse. The books, the shelves, the walls, and the shadows, they were all part of it. They were the curse. And as long as they existed, the ghosts would never escape. They would never be free. Neither would I. But there was no time to waste. If I didn't act now, if I hesitated, it would be too late. The ghosts were already closing in, their shapes blurring as they surrounded me. They were not just watching me now, they were waiting, as if they knew what I was about to do. And they didn't want me to succeed. I turned on my heel, heading toward the deepest part of the library, where the oldest books were kept, the place where the curse had originated. I didn't know what I would find there, but I knew one thing: I couldn't stop until I had uncovered the truth. Even if it meant sacrificing everything. The library was alive with energy now, the shadows more pronounced, the whispers louder. The ghosts were following me, but I didn't care anymore. I was ready to face whatever lay ahead. I had already lost everything. But I still had one thing left, the will to fight. The truth awaited, buried deep within the heart of the library. And I was determined to find it. The deeper I ventured into the library, the more the air seemed to thicken, pressing down on me. Each step I took was heavier than the last, as if the very walls were closing in, suffocating me. The shadows around me stretched and writhed, constantly shifting, a visual reminder that I was not alone. The ghosts, those tortured souls, were following me, their hollow eyes watching, waiting for something. What, exactly, I couldn't say. But their silent presence was more oppressive than anything I had encountered before. I reached the farthest section of the library, the one that seemed abandoned by time itself. The air here smelled older, dustier, as though the years had settled thickly over the forgotten books lining the shelves. It was in this part of the library, hidden away in the corner of the room, that I found it, the book that would change everything. At first, it appeared like any other, an ancient tome, its cover worn and cracked from years of neglect. But as I ran my fingers over the surface, a cold shiver ran down my spine. There was something alive in that book, something that made my pulse quicken in both fear and curiosity. Without fully understanding why, I opened it. The pages were blank. But as my fingers touched the first one, the words began to appear, slowly at first, then faster, as though the book was being written in real time, responding to my touch. The words that formed on the page weren't just any text, they were images. Visions. Moments frozen in time. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, as I saw it, the first vision. A student, a young woman, sitting at one of the tables in the library, absorbed in a book. But something was wrong. A shadow, dark and twisted, seemed to hover behind her, curling around her like a serpent. The figure was indistinct, a shape that barely registered in the corner of my vision, but I knew it was there. Watching. The vision shifted again, and this time I saw the student standing, walking toward the back of the library, the shadows still clinging to her. She passed through a narrow hallway, and as she did, the hallway seemed to warp, its dimensions stretching unnaturally, as though the space itself were bending in response to the presence of the shadow. And then, the most horrifying part, the young woman vanished. Completely. I flipped frantically through the pages, my hands trembling. Another vision. This time, a different student. A man, looking through the same rows of books I had walked past earlier. His face was filled with a sense of unease, as though he too felt something amiss in the air. But before he could even turn around, the shadow engulfed him, pulling him into the darkness. I stopped, my fingers frozen on the page. I had seen it now, they were all here, the students who had vanished in the library's history. Their deaths hadn't been accidents. They hadn't been random. They had been chosen. And this book, the one I now held in my hands, knew. But there was more. The book wasn't just showing me their final moments, it was showing me before their deaths. I could see their lives in the library before they met their end. Their conversations, their habits, their fears. I watched as they laughed and studied, unaware that their time was running out. It was as if the book had the power to reach back through time, revealing the lives of the students before they were consumed by the curse. I felt sick, overwhelmed by the flood of images. But there was one thing I knew for certain: the book wasn't just a witness to their lives. It was controlling them. It had been recording everything that had happened to the students, and now it was showing me their deaths, as if to taunt me, to force me to understand the depth of the curse. And then, as if in response to my thoughts, the book shifted once more. The page turned itself. And there, staring back at me, was a new vision. A vision of me. I wasn't just reading the past. I was now a part of it. The shadows in the library shifted again, and I realized I wasn't watching the past anymore. I was seeing the future. The book had shown me the deaths of the students, but now it was showing me my own fate. My death. My inevitable end. And I understood then, this was no longer about escaping the library or breaking the curse. The curse was me now. I was bound to the library, just like them. I slammed the book shut, my breath ragged in my chest. But it was too late. The truth had already been revealed. The curse had already claimed me. I stood frozen, the book clutched tightly in my hands, my heart pounding as the weight of the vision I had just witnessed settled over me. The faces of the students, their lives, their deaths, all of it was clear now. But there was something I hadn't understood. Something that had been missing, a detail that had slipped past me in the flood of images and knowledge. As I gazed around, the shadows in the library seemed to shift and flicker more violently, as if they were alive, stretching toward me. The whispers of the ghosts grew louder, more insistent. I turned, looking at the ethereal figures that now surrounded me, their hollow eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. They were no longer just specters of the past, they were something more, something darker. One of the figures, a young woman in a tattered dress, stepped forward. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken, and her lips curled into a twisted grin. She reached out a hand, but it was not a gesture of kindness. It was an invitation, one I could not refuse. "You don't understand, do you?" she whispered, her voice like a breeze, cold and haunting. "We are not just spirits of the past. We are part of it. The library has taken us, swallowed our souls, because of what we carry with us." My mind reeled as the truth began to sink in. The book I held was no mere record of the past. It was a trap, a prison. The library wasn't just a place where students had died. No. It was a place where their secrets had led to their downfall. And it had consumed them, their souls twisted into the very fabric of the library itself. The woman's eyes burned with an unnatural light as she continued. "We brought our darkest fears here. Our guilt. Our shame. And the library, it fed on it. It knows everything. Every lie. Every sin. Every secret. And it has kept us here, trapped between life and death, bound to the place where we hid our true selves." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. These weren't just ghosts of students who had met untimely deaths. They were the remnants of those who had been consumed by their own darkest thoughts, by the secrets they had buried deep within themselves. The library had fed on those secrets, absorbing the essence of their souls, binding them to the shelves and the shadows forever. One by one, the other figures began to speak, their voices overlapping, creating a cacophony of torment. Each student had come here with something they were running from, something they couldn't face, something they thought they could hide. And the library had taken it all, devouring their very essence, leaving only empty, broken shells behind. We were never meant to be here, another ghost, a man with a torn suit, whispered. The library, it does not just keep knowledge. It keeps everything, the things we wish to forget, the things we fear most. And now, we are part of it. We are bound to these shelves, to the books, to the shadows. Forever. I felt my breath catch in my throat as the weight of their words settled on me. I had been so focused on escaping, on trying to break the curse, that I had never stopped to think about the true nature of the library. It wasn't just a haunted place. It was a sentient being, one that thrived on the darkness within people. It had consumed these students not because they had died, but because they had chosen to bring their darkest selves into the one place where their secrets could never remain hidden. As the figures closed in around me, I realized that I was no longer just an observer. I was becoming part of the library's dark history, a part of its endless cycle. The shadows whispered to me, calling me to join them, to accept the truth that there was no escape. The library had already taken what it wanted from me, my fear, my curiosity, my guilt. It had claimed me, just as it had claimed them. I dropped to my knees, the weight of the book in my hands now feeling like an anchor, pulling me into the depths of the library. There was no way out. I wasn't just trapped in the library anymore. I was becoming it. The woman's twisted smile grew wider as she extended her hand toward me. "You'll understand soon enough," she said, her voice a soft, mocking lullaby. "You'll join us. And your secrets will live here, just like ours. Forever." And then, the darkness closed in, and I understood the library didn't just trap its victims. It consumed their very souls, their essence, and it would never let them go. And now, I was one of them. The book trembled in my hands as I read the final, chilling passage. It was as if the words were searing into my soul, dragging out the truth I had been avoiding all along. My vision blurred, the pages of the book melding with the faces of the ghosts around me. Their eyes seemed to pierce into my very core, and I could feel the weight of their gaze pressing down on me. I couldn't breathe. The realization was too much to bear. The truth that had been hidden for so long was now clear, but it was a truth I had not expected, a truth I could never have imagined. The library wasn't just a place where students came to learn. It wasn't just a silent monument to knowledge and history. It was a temple, a dark, ancient place that fed on the secrets, fears, and sins of those who entered it. It had been designed as a sanctuary for knowledge, but in the hands of the cursed, it had transformed into something much more sinister. It was a trap. The students who had died here, their deaths were not mere accidents. They had been chosen, not by fate, but by the library itself. The books, the walls, the very air in this place had a life of their own. A life that fed on the darkest parts of the human soul. As I turned another page in the cursed book, the horrifying details of the ritual became clear. The library had once been a place of scholarly pursuit, but over the centuries, it had evolved into something far more dangerous. It had begun to attract those who were desperate, those who were hiding something, running from their pasts, their mistakes, their deepest fears. And the library, sensing the darkness in their hearts, had drawn them in. Each of these students, in one way or another, had come to the library with something to hide. Whether it was guilt over a crime they committed, a secret they could never share, or a fear they could never face, the library had found them. And it had offered them what they wanted most, escape from their burdens. But the escape was not freedom, it was imprisonment. The library didn't just absorb their knowledge, it absorbed them. It fed on their secrets, their lies, their fears, and in return, it promised them knowledge. But the price was steep. The moment they accepted its offer, they became bound to it. Trapped, not in the physical sense, but in a deeper, more horrific way. Their souls became entwined with the very books they read, the very shelves they touched. They became a part of the library, its endless, eternal cycle of consumption. And now, as the truth of it all dawned on me, I realized that I had walked into the same trap. My curiosity, my desire to uncover the truth, had made me no different from those who had come before me. The library had chosen me too. I had entered its depths with my own secret, a fear, a guilt I had never shared with anyone. And it had sensed it. It had drawn me in, just as it had drawn the others. I looked up from the book, my heart racing, my head spinning. The faces of the students who had died here staring at me from the shadows, their expressions filled with sorrow and rage. They weren't just victims. They were trapped, bound to the library forever. And now, I was bound to them. The woman's voice cut through my thoughts, her words laced with venom. "You thought you could escape," she sneered, stepping closer to me. "But the library sees everything. It knows every secret, every lie. It knows you better than you know yourself." I wanted to scream, to run, but I knew it was pointless. There was no escape. The library had claimed me. It had taken my secret, my fear, and in return, it would keep me, just like it had kept them. I staggered backward, my mind reeling, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The walls of the library seemed to close in around me, the shelves growing taller, the darkness more suffocating. The ghosts were no longer just lingering figures. They were alive, their souls trapped in the books, forever a part of this place. And I understood then, there was no way out. The library was a prison, and its walls were made of more than stone and wood. They were made of fear, of guilt, of the darkest parts of the human soul. And I was now one of the prisoners. The whispers of the ghosts grew louder, swirling around me, as if they were trying to pull me in. The truth was undeniable now. The library didn't just keep knowledge. It kept everything, every secret, every lie, every soul it had ever consumed. And there was no way out. Not for me. Not for anyone. The air in the library grew thick, suffocating, pressing against me as I staggered through the rows of shelves. The whispers that had once been distant now felt like they were inside my head, swirling around my thoughts, drowning me in their despair. The faces of the dead students weren't just in the corners of my vision anymore, they were right there, their hollow eyes staring at me from the pages of every book, from the gaps between the shelves. Their gazes burned into my skin, their cold, phantom hands brushed against my face like icy wind. I tried to run, my feet stumbling, but every step felt like I was wading through quicksand. The further I went, the more the library twisted. The shelves shifted, the walls expanded and contracted, and the sound of my footsteps was swallowed by the oppressive silence. The clock on the wall had stopped, its hands frozen in time. I couldn't even hear my own heartbeat anymore. It was as though the very space around me was changing, warping into something far darker. "You're not leaving," a voice hissed from behind me. It was low, almost a whisper, but it echoed through the library like a thunderclap. I spun around, but there was no one there. The shelves loomed, towering over me like dark sentinels, their wooden faces growing twisted and contorted. The light, once warm and comforting, flickered and dimmed, casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. Another whisper, this time from my left, "You're part of us now." I turned again, the cold sweat pouring down my back. The faces, the ghostly students, were everywhere, their eyes following my every movement. They weren't just watching me anymore, they were moving. Their figures flickered like static on an old television, their outlines blurring between the real and the unreal, becoming more and more tangible with each passing second. One of them stepped forward, a man in an old-fashioned academic robe, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow pits of darkness. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, only a sickening, gut-wrenching feeling of pressure building in my chest. I tried to scream, but my throat was tight, my voice strangled by the suffocating air. I could feel the weight of their collective presence pressing down on me, crushing me under the sheer force of their despair. I turned again, desperate to escape, but the library was shifting, rearranging itself, a maze with no exit. The door I had seen earlier was gone, replaced by a wall of books that stretched on endlessly. There was no way out. No escape. The walls weren't just enclosing me, they were closing in on me. I could hear their voices now, clearer than ever, murmuring in unison. You cannot leave. You belong to the library. You are one of us. Panic surged through me. I reached for the walls, the bookshelves, desperate to find a way out, but my hands met nothing solid. The shelves were dissolving into darkness, fading like smoke in the air. The floor beneath me trembled as though it was alive, as if it were about to swallow me whole. Suddenly, I felt it, a coldness creeping into my bones, a presence that wasn't just the ghosts. It was something older, something far more powerful. It was the library itself. The very walls, the ancient stone and wood, the hundreds of thousands of pages that lined the shelves, they were all alive. And they were hungry. The room spun around me, and I stumbled, falling to my knees. My breath was shallow, my chest tight, as though the very air was being sucked out of me. The whispers became screams, a chorus of voices that ripped through my mind, telling me the same thing over and over again. You will stay. You will stay forever. The shadows twisted and writhed, and the faces of the ghosts grew more distinct. Their features were clearer now, their eyes full of sorrow, but also anger. They surrounded me, their hands reaching out to touch me, their cold fingers brushing against my skin. Each touch sent a jolt of icy terror through my veins. I wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything to escape, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. I was trapped. The library had me, it had taken me, just like it had taken all the others before me. And now, I was becoming a part of it. My body, my mind, my soul, they were all being pulled into the abyss, becoming just another fragment of the library's endless darkness. The light flickered one last time, and the world around me dissolved into blackness. The voices were gone. The ghosts were gone. But I wasn't alone anymore. The library had won. I stood, my legs trembling, barely able to support my weight as the last remnants of the twisted reality around me began to coalesce. In the dim, suffocating darkness of the library, something shifted. A light flickered in the far corner, pale and ghostly. It wasn't real, it couldn't be. But something within me told me to go toward it, that this was the answer. The key. I stumbled toward the light, my breath ragged in my chest. My heart was pounding in my ears, as though it was trying to break free from my ribcage. The shadows clawed at my heels, and the whispers of the dead grew louder, more insistent. Don't go, they warned. You'll never come back. But I had no choice. The light seemed to draw me in like a magnet, its pull irresistible. As I approached, I saw what it was. A small, ancient book, lying open on a pedestal. It glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, and I could feel its power, a cold, familiar sensation that ran like ice through my veins. I reached out, my hand shaking uncontrollably, but the moment my fingers brushed against the book, I felt a sharp jolt of pain, as though the book had sent a shock through my very soul. My body stiffened, my vision blurred, but I didn't pull away. The light from the book intensified, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. The voices grew frantic. "No, no, don't touch it," they screamed, their cries echoing in every corner of my mind. But I had already made up my mind. I had come this far, and I knew this was my only chance. The price would be steep, I understood that. But there was no other way out. The book's pages fluttered, as though caught in an unseen wind. The words within the pages seemed to swirl, forming and reforming, revealing the truth that had eluded me for so long. The curse was not just a trap, it was a contract. A pact made long ago by the very souls who now haunted these halls. The library was bound to the curse, and it fed off the souls of those who had died here, drawing them in, trapping them forever. But there was a way to end it. A way to break the cycle, to release the trapped souls. The key was there, in the pages, a ritual, a binding spell, a final release. But there was a cost. A terrible, inevitable cost. I could see the truth clearly now. To break the curse, to free the souls of the students, I would have to take their place. My own soul would be bound to the library forever, just as theirs had been. I would become one of them, another lost spirit, another whisper in the endless halls. I trembled as I read the final line of the ritual. There was no escaping this. The ghosts would be freed, but only at the price of my life, my soul. It was the only way. As the realization settled into my bones, the whispers faded, the light growing brighter and brighter. The ghosts that had haunted me, that had followed me in every corner of the library, stood silent now, watching me with hollow, expectant eyes. They understood. They had made this choice long ago, and now I would make it too. I whispered the words of the ritual aloud, my voice shaking. The book trembled in my hands, its power building, ready to consume everything in its wake. I could feel my soul slipping away, slowly but surely, as though it was being pulled from me like a thread unraveling. The last thing I heard was the sound of pages turning, the faintest whisper of a voice that was neither mine nor theirs. "Thank you." And then, darkness. Silence. I was free. But I was also trapped. My body had vanished, but my soul, it was now part of the library, part of the curse that bound it. The ghosts, the students who had once wandered these halls, were gone. But I was here now. I would never leave. Forever. I had a plan. Or at least, I thought I did. Armed with the knowledge I had gathered, the ritual from the book in hand, I was ready to confront the darkness that had consumed this library, the ancient curse that had trapped so many souls before me. I would break it, no matter the cost. But nothing prepared me for the reality that awaited. The silence in the library was deafening. It had been hours, or maybe days, since I had last seen the outside world. My body felt alien to me now, heavy, detached. The book burned in my hands, its pages still glowing faintly as if aware of the weight of the decision I had to make. I could feel the eyes of the ghosts on me, their cold, invisible presence closing in from every angle, waiting, watching, judging. I took a deep breath, the air thick with a sense of inevitability. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn away, to abandon this madness. But there was no turning back now. I had already crossed the point of no return. If I was to break the curse, I had to follow through, no matter how impossible it seemed. The first step of the ritual was simple. I had to find the heart of the library, the place where the curse had first taken root. It had to be the central chamber, the one no one had ever dared to enter. I knew it was hidden somewhere deep within the library, just beyond the reach of even the most diligent researchers. The place that was, for all intents and purposes, forbidden. As I moved through the labyrinth of shelves and corridors, the whispers of the ghosts grew louder, more insistent. They were like a constant hum in my mind, driving me forward, urging me to complete the ritual. The book's pages turned on their own, the words shifting and rearranging, the language becoming more and more foreign the deeper I went. I arrived at the door, the one I had seen in my dreams, the one that had always been there but I had never noticed before. It was ancient, adorned with symbols that made my head spin just by looking at them. I could feel the weight of the curse pressing against the door, trying to keep me out, to stop me from uncovering the truth. But I had come too far to back out now. With shaking hands, I pushed the door open. Inside was a vast chamber, more immense than I could have ever imagined. The walls were lined with books that seemed to stretch endlessly, their spines cracked and worn with age. In the center of the room stood a massive stone altar, covered in dust and cobwebs, as if it had not been touched in centuries. I approached the altar, my heart racing. The book in my hands trembled as if it were alive, pulling me closer. I knew this was it, the final step. I began to chant the incantation, my voice shaky but determined. The words felt strange on my tongue, foreign and yet familiar, as if they were part of me. As I spoke, the room seemed to shift. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. I could hear the ghosts now, not just their whispers, but their wails, their cries, echoing through the room like a chorus of tortured souls. But then, something went wrong. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and I felt a pull on my chest, like something was reaching inside me, tearing at my very soul. The book fell from my hands, its pages fluttering wildly as though caught in an unseen wind. I tried to grab it, but it was as if the very air was fighting me, pushing me back. The altar began to glow, and the shadows around me twisted, forming shapes that I knew all too well. The ghosts. But they were different now. They weren't just shadows, lingering at the edge of my vision. They were real, their hollow eyes locked onto me, their mouths open in silent screams. And then I realized I had made a fatal mistake. I hadn't followed the ritual exactly. I had misunderstood one of the steps, misread the signs. Instead of freeing the trapped souls, I had fed the curse. I had made it stronger. The ghosts closed in around me, their cold hands reaching for me, their eyes full of sorrow and fury. I tried to run, but the library shifted again, the walls closing in, the paths disappearing into the darkness. The door, the only way out, was gone. I was trapped. Forever. The last thing I heard was the sound of the book's pages turning, as though it were laughing at me. The air in the room was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. The ritual, it had to work. I had to make it work. I had no other choice. My hands trembled as I opened the book once more, the pages frantically turning on their own as if the book itself were trying to resist my control. I had to finish it. I had found the ancient symbols, the incantations. I knew them by heart now. I began to chant, but with each word, the atmosphere in the library grew heavier. The shadows seemed to come alive, curling around the edges of the room, creeping toward me, hungry, restless. At first, nothing happened. The library remained still, oppressive in its silence. But then, the air began to crackle. I felt a sudden chill run down my spine, as if the temperature had dropped 100 degrees in a single breath. The ghosts, the souls of the students trapped here, began to stir. I could hear the soft scraping of their spectral movements, a sound like the rustling of dry leaves. It started subtly, just a faint pressure on my chest, like being watched by 1,000 unseen eyes. But it quickly escalated. A cold wind blew through the room, flipping the pages of the book violently, distorting the words I was trying to read. The whispers grew louder, now unmistakably angry, growling, snarling, their voices rasping in the dark corners of my mind. I faltered for a moment, stumbling over the words in my panic. But it was too late. The first ghost materialized before me, its translucent form flickering in and out of existence. It was a student, one I had seen before, a young man, his face twisted in a silent scream, his eyes hollow and accusing. But something was different this time. His expression wasn't just one of sorrow or pain. It was rage. I tried to continue the chant, but the ghost lunged at me, its hands cold and clawed, grabbing at my throat. I gasped, choking on the icy touch that seemed to drain the very warmth from my body. The air around me vibrated with an unnatural force, the whispers now a cacophony of fury, all of them pressing in, surrounding me. I struggled, trying to push the apparition away, but it only seemed to grow stronger. The others followed, one by one, their forms materializing like shadows of death. They were no longer mere phantoms of memory. They were tangible, angry, violent. Their hands clawed at me, their eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. I couldn't breathe. I could feel the life being drained from me, my limbs growing weak. The book slipped from my grasp, its pages now fluttering wildly, as though mocking my futile attempts to control it. I reached for it, but a ghost pinned me to the floor, its cold, suffocating weight pressing me down. The shadows began to twist, spinning around me like a vortex, pulling me deeper into their grip. The ritual had backfired. The curse was no longer something I could escape. It was feeding off my fear, my desperation. And I was its next victim. The ghosts grew more aggressive, their forms distorting, becoming monstrous. Their eyes, those hollow, empty eyes, stared into me, and I saw the truth. They weren't just students anymore. They were the embodiment of the curse itself, and I had just made them stronger. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My vision blurred, the edges of reality fading away as the shadows consumed me, and the whispers of the dead turned into a deafening roar in my ears. There was no escape. I was one of them now. My body no longer obeyed me. I could feel it, the strange, alien sensation creeping through my veins, an icy numbness replacing the warmth of life. My limbs were frozen, locked in place, as though they no longer belonged to me. I tried to move, to run, but my muscles betrayed me. I could only watch helplessly as the transformation began. The whispers had faded, replaced by a deafening silence. My breath came in shallow gasps, each one harder to take than the last. I could feel the walls of the library closing in around me, the very air heavy and oppressive. The books, they were watching, their pages now alive, their covers shifting in ways that defied logic. The shelves seemed to lean in closer, their wooden frames groaning in protest as if they were stretching toward me, reaching for me. And then, the change began. My skin, once warm and human, started to turn stiff, cold. It felt like paper, like old leather, brittle and worn. My hands, once trembling with fear, began to stiffen into rigid shapes, resembling the edges of an ancient tome. I could feel the ink of the pages seeping into my veins, replacing the blood that had once flowed freely. It wasn't just my hands. My entire body felt as if it was being absorbed, pulled into the very structure of the library. The wooden floor beneath me seemed to rise up, wrapping around my legs, binding me to the earth. I could feel the weight of the books above me pressing down, and I understood I was becoming part of the library, part of the very curse that had trapped all those souls before me. The walls were breathing now, shifting, expanding and contracting in time with the beat of my heart, though I wasn't sure if it was still my heart that was beating. My vision blurred, and the edges of my mind began to fracture, breaking apart like the pages of a forgotten book. Every thought, every memory was slipping away, replaced by a deep, endless darkness. The library was consuming me, and I could do nothing to stop it. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but my voice had been stolen. My mouth barely moved, my lips cracking like old parchment. All I could hear now was the deafening silence of the library as it claimed me, as it swallowed me whole. I was no longer a student, no longer a person. I was part of this place, the dark heart of the library, the ghostly presence that would haunt it for eternity. The books would remember me now. My name, my face, my life, all would be forgotten, replaced by the endless rows of forgotten pages and the eternal whispers of the lost souls who had come before me. I felt my eyes close, though I didn't know if they were still mine. I felt my last breath slip away, carried off by the wind that whispered through the cracks in the library walls. And then, everything was still. I was nothing now. Just another piece of the library. Another page. Another ghost. Time had become an illusion. The world around me was fading, like the final flickers of a dying candle. The whispers were gone now, but their presence lingered, like a haunting echo in the deepest corners of my mind. My body no longer moved, no longer obeyed me, yet somehow I was still aware of the slow, painful process of becoming one with this place. I had tried so hard. I had tried to find a way out, to break the curse. But now, as the transformation consumed me, I understood the truth. There was no escape. There had never been any escape. This library, with its endless shelves and forgotten books, had always been more than just a building. It was a prison, and it had been waiting for me, for all of us who had crossed its threshold. I could feel the weight of the walls, pressing in from all sides, crushing me slowly into the very fabric of this cursed place. The words that had once been so clear in my mind, the chant, the ritual, the hope for freedom, all dissolved, replaced by the horrifying realization that my soul was no longer my own. It was bound here, with the others who had come before me, trapped in the endless labyrinth of knowledge, of ghosts, of death. The cold had seeped into my bones, replacing all warmth, but it wasn't just physical. It was a coldness of the soul, a deep, unfathomable chill that cut straight to the heart. There would be no release, no end. I had become part of the library, part of the curse, and my existence would now be as unyielding as the pages of the books that lined the shelves. I could already feel my consciousness slipping, my identity unraveling, becoming a mere whisper in the dark corners of the library. I couldn't remember my name anymore. My past life was fading, like a story forgotten by time. I was becoming one of the forgotten, my memories, my thoughts, my essence, all being consumed by the very walls that had once seemed so familiar. My soul was no longer mine to control. A final shiver ran through me, but it wasn't from fear or cold anymore. It was the last vestige of my humanity, slipping away into the void. In the final moment, I understood what I had failed to grasp before. This place didn't just trap the body. It trapped the soul, and once you were taken, there was no escaping the endless cycle. I was here now, forever. Part of the books. Part of the shadows. Part of the curse. And as the darkness closed in around me, I realized with terrifying clarity that the library, this place of forgotten knowledge, had claimed me for eternity. My soul, now lost in its labyrinth, would never know peace again. My vision blurred, and the world around me dissolved into an impenetrable fog. The last remnants of my existence, my very soul, were slipping away into nothingness, becoming part of the very air, the dust, the shadows that clung to the bookshelves. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The air was too thick, too heavy for any breath to escape. And then, in an instant, I understood. I wasn't dying. I wasn't escaping. I was becoming them, one of the ghosts who wandered these haunted halls, doomed to repeat the same cycle over and over again. I could feel it now, the pull of the library's ancient, twisted energy dragging me into its depths. My body, my mind, all of it was dissolving into the darkness, but instead of fading into oblivion, it was being replaced. I could see it happening. My form was becoming translucent, my edges blurring, as if I were being absorbed by the very walls I had tried so desperately to escape. The faces of the past students who had been trapped here with me flickered before my eyes, their hollow, tormented expressions reflected in the glassy depths of the books. And then, I felt it. A presence, another soul entering the library. Another student, fresh, unaware, stepping into the same trap I had once walked into, feeling the same false sense of safety and routine. I could hear their footsteps echoing in the distance, growing louder. It was happening again. I watched, helpless, as they passed the same rows of books, the same towering shelves, unaware of the fate that awaited them. The cycle was beginning again, just as it had before. The new student would wander these halls, drawn to the mystery, the knowledge, the silence, and they would, like me, be slowly consumed by the darkness, trapped by the curse of the library. I could feel their presence growing closer, but I couldn't warn them. I couldn't stop them. All I could do now was watch as they, too, would begin to hear the whispers, see the figures in the distance, feel the weight of the curse pressing down on them. They would find the same books, the same ancient rituals. They would try to escape, just as I had, but they wouldn't. None of us ever did. In the deepest recesses of my new existence, I understood my fate. I had become the very thing I feared, the new ghost, trapped forever in the library's endless embrace. My soul would now roam the halls, seeking answers that would never come, just as the others had done before me. I was no longer a person. I was a part of the library, bound to it for eternity. And so, the story would continue. As new students passed through the doors, they would unknowingly follow the same path, reliving my terror, feeling the same hopelessness. My voice, though silent, would whisper in their ears, guiding them deeper into the mystery, into the curse. The library would remain unchanged, its endless cycle never broken. And I would always be here, waiting for the next soul to come, to take my place, to become another shadow among the books. Years passed. Seasons came and went, and the library remained untouched and eternal, cloaked in dust and silence. The building's facade continued to glisten in the sunlight, a beacon of knowledge, curiosity, and solitude. Students came and went, each day like any other, filling the rows of tables and chairs, unaware of the stories hidden between the lines of books or the shadows lurking beyond the edge of their vision. But those who stayed late at night, the ones who lingered just a bit too long in the library's labyrinthine halls, sometimes felt something strange, a sudden chill, a whisper too soft to discern, a flicker of movement at the corner of their eyes. They dismissed it, of course, chalking it up to exhaustion or the eerie quiet that filled the library after dark. Most went home without a second thought, returning to their lives and routines. Yet, every once in a while, a curious soul would venture deeper. They would follow a whisper down forgotten aisles, linger too long over dusty pages in abandoned corners. Some might notice that the shadows around them didn't quite match the empty space, that certain books seemed to carry a weight beyond their age, as if someone or something had recently touched them. Those rare few who dared to look too closely, who felt a pull toward the ancient secrets hidden within, often found themselves unable to resist. Drawn in by an invisible force, they would search for answers about the library's history, about the students who had vanished without explanation. Some even dared to dig deeper, feeling as though the walls themselves were speaking to them, urging them on. And then, like those before, they would disappear, leaving only their belongings, hastily abandoned, or their notes, scribbled with a frantic urgency, as though they had seen something no one else could. They would become the whispers, the shadows, the faint presence in the dark corners of the library. The library, with its ancient stone walls and towering shelves, remained unchanged. The staff replaced the missing students' names in the records, erased their presence, and locked the doors each night without a second thought. But the spirit stayed. The cycle continued. For the library wasn't merely a place of knowledge, it was a trap. A labyrinth of secrets, waiting patiently for its next guest. And for those willing to listen closely, in the quiet hours of the night, they would hear them, the whispers of those trapped within, begging for release, their voices lost forever in the pages of unwritten books, unseen yet ever present, waiting for the next seeker of forbidden knowledge. The curse lived on, and the library waited. Thank you for making our stories part of your relaxation time. We hope they brought you a sense of peace and transported you to a world of fantasy and mystery. If you enjoyed the stories, feel free to leave us a review. Your feedback inspires us and helps us make the content even better. Now, unwind to the calming sounds of rain and thunderstorms, which will continue to set a tranquil mood. Let these sounds carry you gently into the realm of dreams. Don't forget to like our page if you haven't yet. Wishing you a restful night's sleep. Relax, rest well, and good night.